We're on Daf Chav Beis, and there are a few things I wanted to see in the Yalkut Urim. You know what? Maybe we'll do the Gemara first a little bit, and we'll start with Tani Debei Rabbi Chia, which is approximately 7-8 lines down from the top. We already began this on Thursday on Yom Chamishi, and you remember that Rabbi Chia adds to the list of shniyos another 6 categories. He's got shlishi shebibno, so he's got 3 generations coming from his son, which means he's got his son's daughter, which would be his granddaughter, and then he has his son's granddaughter, which would be his great-granddaughter. That's called shlishi shebibno. And he's got Shebet Bito. So that would mean that it's his great-granddaughter through his daughter. And then he has the Shebet Ben Ishto. Now we're talking about the relatives of his wife. He's not allowed to marry the son of his wife from a different marriage. He cannot marry the granddaughter of his wife. Okay, so that would mean Nechdas Bina. Wait a minute. So you have to add one other generation, right? Because we're talking about a great granddaughter through his wife, meaning she has a son, and this would be her son's granddaughter, which is the great granddaughter of the great grandfather. And then he has Shebet Bas Ishto, or let's say his wife has a daughter, and we're talking about her daughter's granddaughter, which being his great-granddaughter by marriage. So that's number 4. And then we have, Shniya. Shniya means they're all the above are included on the Shniyas Larayos. And then we have Revi'i Shebechamiv. So we're talking about his wife's father, which is his father-in-law, and a woman that was married to his father-in-law is an erva. And then we're going to talk about his father-in-law's grandmother, not just his father-in-law's mother, but his father-in-law's mother's mother, his father-in-law's grandmother. And that's called Revius. Revius means that it's, number 1, his wife, and through his wife, we're going 4 generations. His wife's father and her wife, his wife's father's mother, his wife's father's mother's mother. That's called Revius. And now it's interesting because until this point, we're dealing with 3 generations. Now we're dealing with 4 generations. That's only because he's counting each time. Then we have Shebet Chamoso, or his wife's mother, his mother-in-law. So we go his mother-in-law, which is his wife's mother, and her mother, meaning the grandmother of his mother-in-law. So we're going 4 generations. Ole Ravina Ravashi, Maishna, Lamaila, Dikachashiv, Le Ishto. So in the case of Chamav or Chamosa, where it was Labaila, we were going up generations, correct? Grandmother, wife's grandmother, and so forth and so on. There, he calculates from Ishto, which gave him 4 generations. Because it was his wife's, for example, his wife's father's mother's mother. So it was 3 generations from his father-in-law, 4 generations from his mother. And again, the same thing applies to the mother-in-law. Umaishna, when he goes down Lamata generations, meaning he's talking about his children's children and their children, right? So you're talking about Bito or Beno and Bas Bito and Bas Bito and so forth and so on. And there, he only calculates 3 generations, meaning he just 1 second, local chashuv leili each. And these are the right. These are also not only the children of his children and so forth and so on, but it's also the children of his wife. And he doesn't count the wife in the cheshbon, right? He's talking about the wife's grandchild, who's called shlishi, granddaughter, I should say, because it's always got to be a daughter. So the Gemara answers Lamaila, when he's going from his wife upwards towards, the grandparents of his father-in-law or his mother-in-law, is kol isura mikoch ishtokos, right? The entire erva here, relationship, is through his wife. I mean, none of these people, his in-laws and any of their grandparents, his parents and grandparents, are related to him. It's all through his wife. He counts the first generation as ishto. It's like in chemistry, you have bonds, you know what I mean? So the first bond is between him and his wife. Because now we're going to his wife's relatives through her parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. So therefore the wife becomes the first bond, and therefore we have to count her as number one. But Lamata, when he's talking about, let's say, his son, who has a daughter and a granddaughter, or his daughter who has a daughter or granddaughter, so those are the grandchildren of his son or his daughter, which are his great-grandchildren. There's no bond in between. These are all blood relatives. These are all genetic relatives. The Isura Lav Mikoch Ishtokos. There's no need to add Ishto into the equation. Now, Loka Chashavli, right? That we read already. That it's a little bit strange because in the case of his son's grandchildren, you're right, there's no need to introduce Ishto. But in the case of his wife's grandchildren, etc., there it comes through his wife. Yeah, but the answer is very interesting. These are his children and grandchildren, etc. And it's not a result of the fact that he's married to this woman. Even if, let's say, he had a rape relationship, or they would still be his relatives. You can't talk about each of them. In the case of a man who rapes a woman and her mother is chamosa, or her father's chama, that's only if he married her. If he wasn't married to her, then there would be no connecting bonds as far as Shnios Larayos are concerned. Here, the Shnios Larayos are the fact that this child is his son. So it really doesn't have to do with Ishto. I mean, it happens to be that it's also the son of his wife, or the granddaughter of his wife in all those cases, which would be enough to create a Shnia. But we don't need that. It doesn't have to be, of his wife. It could be through a rape relationship, which is not Ishus. So the Gemara says, "V'ha ben ishto, ubas ishto disur mikoch ishto kasig loka chashavlei." But wait a minute, you're correct that it goes through his son and his daughter in a case of a rape relationship, and therefore ishto should be omitted because it's his biological son and his son's biological son and granddaughter, etc., etc. But what about a case where a man marries a woman and she already had children from a previous marriage? In that case, he's enjoined from having a relationship with any of her offspring, of her descendants. And that would be nechto or nechdaso through his wife. It's not his grandchild, his granddaughter, it's her granddaughter. So it obviously starts with the Ishus relationship that he has with his wife. So why isn't Ishto calculated in that case? He writes, Kevan shebeben ubas Ishto, isu rak mikoch Ishto. So even a granddaughter through his wife is a Shliel Arayas, then it's only a result of his marriage relationship with his wife. He's not related in any way biologically to this granddaughter. So madua lo manu es Ishto kechelik b'minyan adoros. Then Ishto should have appropriately been counted here and that would jack up the number from Shlishi to Revi because the first bond would be between him and his marriage to Isha. So the Gemara answers, "Ivy the Tony Shloshim Doros Lamata Dite." Once he's calculating the 3 generations, meaning his son's daughter and his granddaughter's daughter, who's his great granddaughter, that's all biological. Loka Chashiv, and he doesn't, and there's no relationship between, and it's not an erva that's generated by Ichus. So therefore, Ichto is not going to be calculated in the Minyan Adoros. Is Tananami Shlosh Doros Lamata. So too, when he calculates his wife's granddaughter, etc., lo chashivle, even though he should now at this point be calculating Ishto because the Iser Erev is only a result of his marriage to his wife, but nevertheless, once he quotes the cases of Lamata Mimenu Mididei, which means his son and his son's, children and grandchildren, and there's no need to mention, or it's not connected at all to Ishto, it's simply his biological offspring. Therefore, Aidi Ditana, since he mentions the Lamata Dide, and there's no need to mention Ishto, so too in the case of Lamata Dida, he's going to omit Ishto. But again, if you're going Lamalo, that's because these are his in-laws, and the entire status of Shniyos Larayas is a result of his marriage to his wife. Now, in the cases of Rabbi Chia that we've been discussing so far, it's 3 generations. Again, if you add each toe, it's 4. But again, it's 3 generations. It's great-grandchildren. And the Gemara now wants to know, does it stop there? I mean, again, it's just hard to even picture this in your mind. Now we're going to get the great-grandchildren. Amalei Rav Ashi, Rav Kahana, Shnios, Libei Rabbi Chia, Yesh Lem Hefsek, or Ein Lem Hefsek. So in other words, if you're talking about, let's say, for example, the mother and the mother of the mother, okay? So that's where we stop. Or do we even go to the mother of the mother of the mother, and go back 1 generation further? Tashma, the Amar Rav, Arba Noshim, Yesh Lem Hefsek. So the Brisa here, or actually it's a statement of Rav, is that there are 4 out of the entire constellation of Shnios, 4 of them have a hefsek. And these cases of aim, ima, are not mentioned amongst the 4. So the Gemara's medayik here from Rav's statement that dafka 4 women, which Rav is going to delineate, those are Ein Lem Hefsek. Okay, so let's see if we can go back for a moment. I'll find this. Omar Rav. This is towards the bottom of the page, about 5 lines up before the end of Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph. Let's not lose that place here on Chaf Beis. But Arba Noshim Yesh Lahem Hefsek means the Gzera of Shnios only applies for 4. I mean to say in 4 Shnios Larayos there's a Hefsek, beyond which there's no Gzera. And Rav only mentioned 3. So which were the 3 that he mentioned? Eshes Achi Ha'em. So now we're talking about aunts by marriage. And it could be the wife of his paternal father, a wife of his maternal father. That's Eshes Achi Ha'em Min Ha'av, Eshes Achi Ha'av Min Ha'em. The kalasa, which would mean, a second. Right, so it's his son's wife, And from the son's wife, we go down one generation to the son's daughter. No, just 1 second. To the son's wife's daughter from a different marriage. So that's going to be Bas Kaloso. And if it would be a granddaughter of his Kala, she would be Muteres, and that's called Yesh Lav Hefsei. And the Gemara is going to try to figure out what the fourth category was, which Rav didn't specify. So the Gemara says, Visu lo. In other words, we have to assume that the categories of shnios that were mentioned by Rabbi Chia have no hefsek, because Rav singled out 4 noshim that have the hefsek. So the Gemara rejects this now. Dilma ki ka'amar Rav. When Rav said that there are only 4 women that have a hefsek, that's lehahi masnisa. In other words, Rav was making a comment on a brisa, and amongst the list in the brisa, only 4 of them have a hefsek. But as far as the brisa Rabbi Chia that we're studying now, that brisa was not on the radar screen of Rav. Rav was not limiting that list in the brisa Rabbi Chia. He was talking about the original brisa. So therefore, the Gemara tries to find a different source for an answer to this question. Oshma, we learned in a brisa, Shlishi Urevi. Okay, now we're talking about generations from his son or his daughter, which would mean his son's daughter or granddaughter, his daughter's daughter or granddaughter. These are his great granddaughters. Urevi, and we had the case of 4 when we dealt with his wife's Lamala, right? Her father and his wife, or his father's mother, father's grandmother of his wife, right? So that's called Revi, which is either his father-in-law or his mother-in-law. And the number here is either Shlishi in the case of his own genetic biological relatives, because there we don't count Ishto, or Revi in the case of his wife's relatives, because we have to count Ishto, in. And we only mention in the Brisa of Chia 3 generations. Fei, lo. Isn't that clearly implying that it's only those 3 relations? The Gemara rejects it and says, Dilma, no. When the Brisa says Shlishi, we have to add another word, Shlishi ve'elach. In other words, any grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the way down to the bottom, great-great-grandchildren, and also Miravi. Now we're going up from his wife's relatives to his wife's grandmother, great-grandmother, and Vielach. And it continues ad infinitum. So the Gemara really doesn't come to any definite conclusion. Now, in the next Gemara of Amalei Ravler of Nachman, there's a little bit of an introduction here, a short introduction. I'll read it to you. Gershon is Gayer Kikotan Shenola, Umin Torah Humuta B'Chala Krobus. This is a little bit of an introduction to it. Sugya and Sariches, learning in the afternoon, and later in the day. El Shasru Chacham B'Krovos Elu. In those krovos, which would be, had they been Jewish, an erva, meaning a doraisa erva, the Rabbanan prohibited those arayos even to a ger. It's all min Rabbanan. In other words, on a doraisa level, a ger is allowed to marry his mother, as strange as that sounds. But since the relationship between a son and a daughter is an erva min Torah, therefore the Rabbanan prohibited it in the case of a ger. Now, what about shnios larayos? The shnios larayos apply to a ger. So, for example, would he be allowed, after his gerus, to have a relationship with his great-granddaughter or his granddaughter? if there was gerus. Omale Rovel Rav Nachman Chazid Mar Haime Rabbono the Asami Marova. I saw a Talmud Chacham that came from Marov, from Eretz Yisrael, the Omar, and he related to me this suffix, Bo b'Marov, that a suffix in Eretz Yisrael. Gazru Shnios Begerim, O lo Gazru Shnios Begerim. Amalei Hashta Uma Erva Gufa, meaning Erva Dorais. Ilav, if not for the Shashlo Yomru. What does it mean, Shalo Yomru? We're afraid that people will think that Yadus is less Kedusha than Goyus, right? That when you leave the state of Goyus, you leave behind certain Isurim as you enter into Gerus. That Kedushas Yisrael now is Mater Isurim. This is a sugya in Chulin, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to remember the case. I think Ben Noach is also. Trying to remember what the case was, but I don't remember right now. Maybe we'll get a chance to see it. In some case in Macholos Hasuras, where Dafka Goy is also not a Jew. But anyway, there's a rule here, Shalo Yomu Boy Mikdusha Chamur Kedusha Kala. In other words, while we were goyim, we weren't allowed to marry these relatives, and now we're allowed to marry these relatives. But if not for this, Shalo Yomru is lo gozu. The Rabbana wouldn't be lo gozu everyone. They wouldn't have asked it. Because since it's on a deraisa level, it's mutter. In other words, what we're saying is that even with regard to arayas doraisa, sometimes the Rabbanan don't institute a gzeira. I have to figure out what case the Gemara has in mind. The Shnios Boy goes without saying that they didn't institute a gzeira in the case of Shnios. Oh, I see. Ilah. Oh, I'm sorry. The Gemara is making a theoretical comment. If there wouldn't have been a problem of Yomru Mikdusha Chamur L'Kedusha Kalabanu, right? If not for that, then all these arayos would be mutter because Ger could come to them. And therefore, it goes without saying that Shnios Larayos, which are not included in the Isser of Ben Noach, none of the Shnios Larayos are prohibited to Ben Noach. So nobody's going to say that you came from a Kedusha Chamur to a Kedusha Kala because these Isur didn't apply to it. Let's see if he tells it out here. I'm sorry. Came in the middle, I say, Mutar Lagami Barais Kurus Mishum Shigesh Ishnios Mi Boy, Vichitzarach Lomar Shalo Gozru Bigerim. I just want to see, maybe in your footnotes, he adds that one sentence. I don't see it here. So I always get a little nervous when I say a pshat that's not here in the Sifta, because he covers all the bases. Can you find a line there that says that Shnios Arayos were never prohibited to a Ben Noach? I mean, that's obviously the pshat in this Gemara, but I just was wondering if you have that. So you're looking at the word Shnios Miboy. And he should say in English something like, it goes without saying, or something along that line, right? Yeah. You have it? If not, I'll take it from you and I'll find it. All right. In 3 seconds, the buzzer is going to go off. So I'm going to take the money. Well, how does he translate the word Shnios Miboy? Can you read? It should be in English. I mean, I can get it in Spanish too, but.
Secondary arrows.
That's all he said. Secondary should say that there was no Gzeira D'Rabbanan, there's no East. Can I borrow you Gemara? I promise I won't steal it. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know. And then it's for the.
However, for reason the Gemara says, 1 second. I'm already past this. It's 24. Oh, is Lokosu Berapana and Shios Mipoi. That's footnote number 39. Secondary arayos are only a rabbinic stringency with regard to Jews, and this stringency does not extend to any Jews. Okay, I just wanted to see it, I don't know why the assistant didn't spell it out. They were so simple. There are certainly no secondary arayos prohibitions for Gentiles. Okay, so it's footnote number 29. Your own edification. Okay. Omar of Nachman, Gerim Hoil the Asu Liyadon, Nemabahu Milsa. Once we spoke about Gerim in regard to relations and Isuri Kurva, I want to add something. And that is that Achim and Aim, this is very close to the sugi that we had on Sari Ches. That means you have two brothers from the same mother. And then they were misguided. Because as a general rule, we don't know who the father is in the case of Gerim. But we can know who the mother is. I mean, she came out of the hospital with these two boys. So they're brothers with the same mother, but lo ya'idu, they should not testify l'chatchila, one against the other, or one for the other, doesn't matter. But idu, but if we accepted their testimony, they do some aids. Once we give them the opportunity to testify, they're not considered brothers because gerek kikad shenoladom. But achim and av me'idim lechatchila, meaning we don't even consider them brothers at all. We don't have any chashash. Today, as we pointed out already in the past, there's DNA testing, so you can know who the father is. But the Gemara doesn't know of anything like that. So the Gemara assumes that there's always promiscuity and you don't know who the father is. According to Meimar, once we go with the Kikot and Shenoladami, which means that these brothers are not related to each other, then they can testify one against the other. The question would be, if one brother was married and he died, would the other brother be allowed to marry his brother's wife? So that might be Gzeira D'Rabbanan. Why ask why is Eidos different? Meaning according to Meimar, who says that l'chatchila, you can allow even brothers from the same mother to testify because kikatan shenolad dami. Why is that different than arayos? Which means that he's not allowed to marry his late brother's wife. So in arayos we were more machmir. I think Gemara wants to justify that. Gemara answers, Eidus lebezdin misura gershon is garikot shenoladam. That with regard to Eidus, it's all a matter of Bezdin accepting their Eidus. And therefore we could be more makil and say that, two brothers that are Gerim can testify one against the other, one with the other. They can testify as a pair of Eidim against somebody else because of the principle of Kikot and Shenolad. And we don't have a chashash that going to be matir brothers to testify, one brother together with another brother, Moshe v'Aaron. We know that Bezdin is not going to allow such a thing. So Eidus is all a question of the supervision of Bezdin. And therefore, we don't have anything to be concerned. Okay, now we're going to look at the Yalkut HaBi'urim on page Yuda Aleph. I think that's up. I just want to make a note of where we got up to tomorrow. Up to the new Mishnah here. Okay. Now, if it's okay with the Olam, before we take a look at Yud Aleph and Yud Beis, I would like to do a bit of a chazara on page Ches. I'm hoping that you have that in your archives. Okay, so on the right column, you'll see a section that starts Madua, and the paragraph starts with Chad Omer Poteres Saros. Now, the discussion here is about Chayvei Lav. If you recall, you could have a case where a brother was married to, for example, a mamzeres, or, for example, when I say a brother, I mean the late brother was married to a mamzeres, or you could have a case where the late brother was a Kohen, and now his wife falls to his younger brother, who's the Kohen Gadol, and he's enjoined from marrying an almana. So we have various cases of chayvei lav. The Gemara now on Daf Chafam and Beis has an analysis of the status of the tzara. So it means that Reuven was married to two wives. One of them was a mamzeres, the other was not. So he's got Rachel and Rivka. Now, when Rachel falls for Yibum together with Rivka, Rachel is out of the picture of Yibum because of Chayvei Lav. And we're not going to apply the principle of Esei Dochalosa, probably because it's Efshel Kaim Shneim, if you hold like Rish Lakish, etc., etc. Oh. And now we have a case of Almana Mina Erisin, which for sure, even if you hold Esei Dochalosa, the case of Almana, there for the Kohen Gadol, you have both a lav and an essay, so certainly ein essay dochalosas. And that's why Yibum is out of the question with regard to Almanim and Erisin who fell to a Kohen Gadol. So it's either because Chalitza is an option or because ein essay. Oh, Hikshu Achron. That's where I wanted to start. And we've seen this in the past, but I wanted to review it because I find it very interesting. He says, one second. Oh, just one second. There's a catch in the Achron that comes before this one. So again, I'm going to have to ask do you have by chance page Vav? Now we're really going back into the archives. I don't even remember if we have a photocopy page Vav. No? All right. So if you, we're almost, yeah, you found it? Oh, great. So you're on the right column, and there's a section that's dark print called in the H Kares. Hikshak Road. I'm sorry, this is the cache I wanted to start with today. He says the following. We're talking about Chayvei Lav and V'esed. Let's say Almana L'Kohen Gadol. So they can't be Yibum because Ein Esed Dochalos V'esed. So Im Choser Iser Eishes Ach. So now that they cannot be Yibum, she becomes an Eishes Ach Shalom Makom Mitzvah, correct? Shuv Naseis Hein L'Chayvei Lavin. I'm sorry, L'Chayvei Krisus. The Yeshem Liftar Af Mechalitza. And we could add, to amplify the question, there should be no ptur, there should be no requirement or possibility of Yibum vis-a-vis the tzara, because we're talking about tzara's erva. So why is it that chayve lavin require chalitza? And in the case of a tzarat's chayve lavin, right, so again, let's go over it. Ruvain's a Kohen, he dies after marrying Leah, and Leah now falls for Yibum to Shimon, who's the Kohen Gadol. Why does Leah need chalitza? I mean, you talk about an erva of Eishes Ah. Not only that, if Reuven was married not only to Leah, he was married to Rivka, then Rivka's Itzara should be Itzara's erva. Why does she require, or maybe even Yibum is a possibility? So when I saw this kash, I was thinking to myself, how do you classify this case? You know, we call it chayve lavin, but on the other hand, paradoxically, it's a chayve kritza situation, because by definition, once it's chayve lavin, then ipso facto it falls under chayve kritza. So the idea crossed my mind. I'm going to try to see if I can fit this into the Avnei Milun, that it all depends what bounces off the yibum, what rejects the yibum. Do you follow my point? If there's an erva that rejects the yibum, then there's no zikas yibum at all. There's no need for chalitza, and clearly the tzara is a tzara's erva. She doesn't need chalitza yibum. But here, if you go back to the root of it, if you ask me why there's no yibum, I won't tell you because it's an erva, because Eishes Ach is exactly what yibum is all about. But the answer is she also happens to be an almana l'kohen gadol. So it's really the lav that rejects yibum. So I'm wondering if I can put this into the Avnei Milun. He says the following: Sha'afim ba'oleh chayev karetz. Even though I have to admit that if the Yavam, let's call him Shimon, would have a relationship with what do we call her, Rachel, Leah, whatever we called her, right? So he certainly would be chayev karetz for that. Mikomakom, paradoxically, chayeves b'chalitza. Why? Lefisha ein Eishes Ach gorin lo liyaseh b'yibum. What is the cause that excludes yibum? What's the anti-force of zikas yibum? It's it's not the Eishes Ach relation. The Eishes Ach is only a repercussion once you remove the mitzvah of yibum. So there's nothing to be mad to the fact that she's Eishes Ach. But if you ask why is there no yibum, the answer is not Eishes Ach, because that's exactly when the Torah commands you with yibum. Sherei, he Eishes Ach she'ein lo banim shehutra liyibum. All the conditions are met to be mated the Yisur Eishes Ach. Ella, Yisur study. Okay, that's the key word here. Study. Shel chayve essay osra. So the key words are gorem and study, if you follow me. Now what knocks off yibum? True, I can't deny that if he would go ahead and have a relationship with this woman, the former wife of his late brother, he would be chayev kares for it. No doubt about it. Because there's no yibum. But nevertheless, the Isur that blocks yibum is a davar study. Does this touch on the question of islandness that we discussed? I have to review it, but the tzara of an islandess is not a tzara of an erva, even though now the islandess becomes Eishes Achim, but it's only for a side reason. There's something that blocks the yibum, but it's not an erva relationship that blocks the yibum. All you have is Eishes Ach, and chayve lavin would not in and of itself block yibum, but because of ein esei dochalosis. So at the end of the day, the impediment, the barrier that prevents yibum is chayve lavin, and that's not enough to remove zikas yibum, so she needs chalitza. Also, b'chiducha Rabbeinu Shmuel, Levarba zeshel chora ein lomer she'eshes ach sheba memela eino nechshav li'erva. Now it sounds like the Avnei Malum is telling us that if A causes the erva to be chal, but the erva itself is only a result of a pre-existing cause, meaning in this case the chayve lavin, so then there's no hafkaz z. He says no, that's impossible. Why? Shrei af b'tzaras erva ein shum isur bilvad isur eishes ach shechozer olea memela li'achar shenifter mikoach ha'erva. He says, what about the case of tzaras erva? In the case of tzaras erva, there's nothing that should prevent yibum, prohibit yibum to the tzara of an erva, but yet she's called a tzaras erva, and she's classified as an erva without any possibility of yibum. Why? Because since the Torah patters a tzaras erva from yibum, now you're left with what? You're left with the erva of eishes ah. So the tzaras erva itself is an eishes ah. I don't get it, really. I would say that the tzaras erva, the Torah says that there's no nefila for yibum. Memela, she's an eishes ah. But in the case of a chayve lavin, the Torah never said that chayve lavin don't fall for yibum. The problem is that you cannot fulfill that mitzvah of yibum because ein essay dochalos of the essay in the case of an alman maris. The im kol zeh harei nechsheves machmas kain li erva lo tafsi bo kiddushin. Reivichal kol sheina oliv umeina ol chalitza. So now I understand the kasha of Rabbi Shmuel, because we have a principle that there's no chalitza in the case where there's no yibum, meaning that where there's no yibum, there's eishes ach, and if there's eishes ach, is therefore there's no chalitza. So why are we calling chalitza in chayve lavin since it's ena ol yibum? So that's what I wanted to suggest now, that she really is ol yibum. The Torah never specifically took chayve lavin out of the parsha of yibum. Is there any source in the mitzvah of yibum? We had a whole discussion about a source in Arias, but here it's just a block, which is he calls study in the language, because there's no possibility of being matir the Isser of Almana L'Kohen Gadol, Isser La. Kosav L'Yashiv Al Pi HaMavuber Ramban B'Sugya Shedin Kol Shein Ol L'Liv Umein Ol L'Chalitza Toli Be'it Fisas Kiddush L'Fisha Sibas Haptur Michalitza Ba'arayos Imishum Shekol Yevamesh Lo Tovsu Ba Kiddushin Af Zika Lo Tofes. Oh, wow. I'm not aware of this Ramban. This Ramban is really a breakthrough. Ramban is saying that when we say that there's no need for chalitza, that's only in the case of a yevama with which he could not have a tfisas kiddush. Not sure how the Ramban knows this, but in any event, so it's the fact that it's impossible to be tofas kedushin. That's what knocks the zika out of the box. It completely undermines the zika, and therefore no ol chalitz. But in case of chayve lavin, I don't know how he's going to square with Rabbi Akiva, but again, we pass against Rabbi Akiva that kiddushin tovs b'chayve lavin. Ulefi zeh shapir chalukim chayve esed she'olim l'chalitza ki af al gav sheish bahem karetz the ach Ainly Easter said, Din Poter Mafkia Yimshe Ikar Ach Shavabon, all Asian action of Fels Libu. Gambe Mokumshik, our Easter Zelo, Huter El Mitzvos, but often the Lomishkach, Kaim Yivu, Lochala Hete. Nimsa Shemash Nesru, Chayve Eser, the Easter Eish Ach, Einze Mishum de Lochal Boem Hete Liyab. Mishum She'enu. Second, I'm sorry, I got. Efse Shel Eish Ach and Ophelis Yibum. גם במקום שכותר איסור, אלא הותר למצוות. ככה זה שחיים ייבום, אוכל להט, ונמצא שמש, וחייבי איסור, אך אין זה משום שלא חל, ונהט לייבום, אלא משום שאין היכתים של קיים בהם. מצד התפוס המראים ככל היבום. שאין איש אך נחשב לי ערבה מפקיע סזי. So I can't tell you I understand every single word here, but I think, again, you'll be the jury, but I think he's saying more or less what we said before, emphasizing in the Avnei Malum the concept of Isud study. It's an Isud study, meaning as far as the Erev of Eishes Ach, the Torah allowed you to be Makayim the Mitzvah Yibur, and it overrides the Isser of Eishes Ach. And here also, in this case, there's no erva to prevent the Yibum from being Chal. Ella what? We have an Isser study, and you have an Isser study, you can't implement the Yibum, but that's not powerful enough to undermine the Zikas. Okay, now we'll take a look on Daf Yuda Aleph, on page Amud Yuda Aleph. You don't have Yuda Aleph? Chasav HaMeir. So now we're talking about Shnios Larayos, and we said that a grandmother is Shnios Larayos, the mother of your mother. Hatam she'em imo ena asur min haTorah. Very strange. The mother of your mother-in-law is an Erva Doraisa, but the mother of your own mother is only Shnius Larayos. How do we understand that? Eim chamoso she eim imo shel ishto. Right, the mother of your mother-in-law is your wife's grandmother, asur min haTorah. And lechora in imo, I'm sorry, aim imo, right? Sometimes when you see aleph mem, you read it as im, but here it's aim, right? Lechora aim imo, rova elav yosef aim chamos, right? Aim chamoso is your wife's grandmother. And she's asura midin Torah, but your own grandmother, your mother's mother, is only an Erva D'Rabbanan. The Meiri Mekneshi Yarda Torah L'Sof Daito Shel Brios. I don't know. This board is on philosophy, but I found it very fascinating. Mashe Motzu Yosef Lachet Ifliga Torah B'Isura. When the Torah thought there was more of a probability, a likelihood of a chet, the Torah became very chum, very mach. A chet motzu yoser b'eim chamoso me'asher b'eim imo. Now, I don't know if this is a psychological principle. The Gemara tells us above a comment that the Anshe Knesset Gedolah prayed on behalf of the destruction of the Yetzer Hara for Gilead riots. It was like too intense. So the Gemara says that the prayers of the Anshe Knesset Gdolah were accepted, but only partially. So with regard to incestual relationships, then the Yetzer Hara was completely removed. But other arayos still is a Yetzer Hara. So maybe, I don't know, that's Miri doesn't quote that Gemara, but maybe in the light of that Gemara, you could say that a person doesn't have a Yetzer Hara for his grandmother because that's included in the bittul of the Yetzer Hara. You don't look at a grandmother with that kind of a Yetzer Hara. But in the case of his mother-in-law, and here we're talking about the mother of his, even the mother of his mother, she's so far removed from him. She's not in any way a blood relative. His wife's grandmother. Torah lahachmir b'lesaris imo. Oh, so now the Miri has a kash. If the Torah only felt that it had to be maflig b'isur in a case where there's more of a chet matzui, what about his own mother? So you're telling me, oh, the Torah didn't have to prohibit his mother's mother because he doesn't feel. So why did the Torah have to prohibit his mother? He says, "Kevan shu yoshein ima bekatnutzo." I mean, you have to know, Freudian psychology here. Well, what's it called? An Oedipus complex? No. Yeah? A son with a mother is called an Oedipus complex? I mean, I think Shakespeare talks about it. No. Anyway, see, Kevan shu yoshein ima bekatnuso, bekiruv bosom. And not only that, the Meiri has another element to the equation. When we ben Tess, already at the age of 9, the halacha sees him as a bar bia. His bia is already v'chayv al ha'arasim. If he has even ha'ara with her, that's a violation. It's error. Kevan shekain karav hadora lachta. Wow. And you can probably write a book on this. Aim imo, the aim of it. Okay, so we have his mother's mother and his father's mother. Kosav aruch laner, tzarich lefarish shemidubar biofen she'aim imo eno eshes avi imo. Right now, if we're talking about the wife, let me get this straight. So, aim of it is his father's mother. Now, if we're talking about so here's kasha. Aim of it should be his grandma. And we already said aim imo. So what's aim of it? He says tzarich lomar. She'aim imo eno eshes avi imo. In other words, his grandmother should come under an old category. Why? Because she is the wife of his father's mother. No, I didn't get that right. What I meant to say is that what? Eshes avi imo. Eshes avi imo, the father of his grandmother, right? Aim imo is also the wife of Aim of it. Get that right? She'im imo, Eshes avi imo. Eshes avi imo. Right? His mother's father, right? His grandfather is married to a woman. So that's his grandma. But I don't need her to come under the Easter Erev of a grandmother because she's already the wife of his grandfather. So the wife of his grandfather is his grandmother. So why do I need Aim Imo if it's already Eshes Avi Imo? So the answer to the Aruch LaNer is El Anusasa. Shimi Ishto Shel Avi Imo and Kena Reza Bechlal Kfar Be'Iser Eshes Avi Imo. So the Torah had to add the case of Aim Imo in the case of Anusasa. Okay. Next, Umuter Adam Be'Eshes Chama. So a man is allowed to marry the wife of his father-in-law. Chasav Ramban, shebe'emes lo hoya tana tzorch l'shanos heter be'eshes chama. Why? Kevan shekol ma shelo shanu chachamim le'isa harehem mutaros. As the Mishnah gives us the list, and we had the Brisa that adds to the list of Shnias Larayas. If it's not listed there, then it's mutter. So Ramban is looking for a new chiddush, an additional chiddush, in the case of Eshes Chama. What's tempting? Why is it tempting to assume that that might be an Ereva relationship? And the answer is Kevan Shashir Atana Shnios the Rabbi Fir. Right, we already established that the list of 6 arayas of great-grandchildren, etc., of Rabbi Chia is not listed in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is Tana Vashir. In Kain Havamina, Gam Eshes Chaviv Shir. And now the Ramban is going to tell you why there's a compelling spara to prohibit Eshes Chamav, the wife of his father. Umistaber Lomar Kain Eman Shebita Shel Eshes Chamav. Right? Let's say his father-in-law has 2 daughters. One of them is his wife. The other one is is Achos Ish. So now there's a funny sort of logic. Right? Talking about Eshes Chamav. Right? And you're telling me that there's a heter to marry Eshes Chamav. And yet, the daughter of that marriage would be an Erev because she's the sister of his wife. How can it be that the daughter is an Erev, but the mother is not an Erev? He says, Shehi tia asura ubita muteres. Just 1 second, did I get it wrong? Achos ishta heich efshar shehi tia asura ubita muteres. Oh, I thought I had it. Now I see I don't have it. Tia asura ubita muteres. That Eshes I don't know how to fit it into the language right now. I could try to fit it in, but I think the logic is clear. That if the daughter of this woman is an Erev, then she herself should certainly be an Erev. So there was a compelling reason why the Bryce had to go out of its way and say, Mutter Adam B'Eshes Chama, that a man is allowed to marry the wife of his father-in-law, because you would have thought, well, since the daughter of this marriage is Eshes, is Achos Ishto, and she's Asur, then certainly her mother should be Asur. How do you fit that into the language? Asura. In other words, it's impossible to say that Bita Muteres, because she's Achos Ishto, and then to say that the mother should be Asura, that would only make sense if Bita was Muteres. Then you could say that we would be matir the ima. Again, I don't know exactly how to fit it into the language, but I'm pretty sure we got the logic. Okay, then. So this is where we're going to stop. Let's just make a note of it. And again, if you would be kind enough to photocopy, he has a Vega here on page Gimel that goes on to page Yudalid. So that's if you have the time. Okay, then. So, wish you a great week, and thank you so much.
So, no shirt.